Welcome to Scoreography, a podcast about the greatest sport on ice, figure skating. I'm Wendy Buskey.
And I'm Adrian Buskey. And in this episode, we are talking to another creator in the figure skating online space. In this instance, somebody who works with a couple of very established brands that if you're aware of figure skating, especially kind of outside of the States, then I'm sure you've heard of Golden Skate and Pirouette Magazine. And our guest this time, Judith Dombrowski, is joining us from somewhere in Switzerland on the way to Germany because you are a jet setter in the European world where you can travel between countries really easily, which we cannot do here in the States. I should probably note you're not speaking on behalf of either of those two publications, but you are somebody who's often in the mix zone, and that's the thing we want to talk about. So, Judith, reintroduce yourself so people can hear your name pronounced properly and tell us about what you do.
Hello, you two. I'm so glad to finally join, and this opportunity finally worked out because we had a couple of tries. There were difficulties on your end, on my end, but finally it works. And I'm so excited to join the podcast because I've been a big fan of your show since a year. I discovered it and I really, really enjoy your content. I'm so glad to be part of it. And you pronounced my name almost correctly. Don't worry. It's Judith Dombrowski. I'm German. The last name is Polish. So yes, I work as a figure skating journalist, mainly for the two outlets you mentioned, for Golden Skate, which is an online outlet based in the US, but is internationally, and Pirouette Magazine, which is one of the very last remaining figure skating magazines outside of Japan and Russia. We do have 10 issues a year coming out in German, and we 2 years ago started with the magazine World Edition, which is one bigger magazine that comes out every year in English. So yeah, I'm working for these two outlets and ready to explain to you the mixed zone, what I work for, and just hit me with your questions.
First off, I think that something you mentioned there is really important, which is that there really aren't many figure skating publications these days. Most of those have seemed to have gone by the wayside. There's a lot of things online, but even then it still remains very niche. And for us, Golden Skate is definitely one of the best resources for news and interviews, and in particular, the post-performance and post-competition interviews. And a lot of those are coming from you in the mix zone. So for people who are not familiar with that terminology, what is the mix zone? What is that at a skating competition?
So first of all, I want to make clear that I'm not behind Golden Skate. I work for Golden Skate. So my editor is an amazing, lovely lady called Paula Slater, who's based in the US. But I'm very glad to work with her and that I am the representative of Golden Skate of most of the events. I do mainly work in the mix zone. The mixed zone is the interview zone that skaters are obliged to enter after their skate, especially at the bigger competitions like Grand Prix events, Europeans for continents, Grand Prix final, and Worlds. It is mandatory for the skaters to walk through the mixed zone and answer questions from journalists who are standing there waiting for them. This is not supposed to be a long interview. If you want to do an in-depth talk with the skater, you have to request it and then you have to schedule it outside the competition, maybe when they're done with everything. The mixed zone, yeah, the skaters usually spend their 3 to 5 minutes, I would say, and answer how they feel about their skate, how their preparation went. Mainly questions that are around the event and around the skate they just performed.
Wow, I didn't actually realize that it was required, but that's interesting. I think it's kind of helpful because I wonder how many people wouldn't go through because they'd be like overwhelmed or tired or whatever if they didn't have to.
Yeah, so officially it is required. There are very few cases where the skaters don't come to the mix zone. And I've heard there would be a possibility that they get a penalty. But I don't think it actually ever happened, at least as long as I work there, because usually it's understandable if they really don't come through. It's because they had a devastating skate, something happened, an injury or something. So I don't think it ever happened. So they are required to walk through. They are not required to say something. So they can be like, no comment, but they are required to walk through.
Yeah, I would imagine that under the high stress circumstances of the competition, and like you said, sometimes those skates go incredibly poorly. And it's tough enough for them to sit in the kiss and cry, which very famously is a stressful situation, and that we see people melt down, hence the name kiss and cry. For you in that situation, managing that type of interview, often with skaters who probably don't have any kind of media training, especially younger skaters don't necessarily know how to manage that. How do you handle that emotional state? How do you empathetically respond or ask questions of somebody who you know might be either on a total adrenaline high or on the flip side of it, be really, really down after a bad performance?
That is definitely challenging. And of course, I'm seriously rooting for all the skaters always to do their best for them. Not because it makes my job easier, but it also makes my job easier, of course. If they come after a performance they are enlightened about, usually they just talk from themselves and they're happy to share their emotions. But as you said, there are the very dark days, and then you really have to handle it with some kind of empathy. So my task for Golden Skate is that I'm kind of required from the website. What I should do is interview the top 5 skaters at all Grand Prix events and everyone who makes the top 10 and the bigger championships events at Grand Prix final, everyone. This is what I should be doing. But if there's a case where it's really, really not a good time, then Golden Skate has all the understanding if it was just not the right moment to talk with the skater. I personally, if I see someone walking through crying, for instance, sometimes I'm the person who tries to comfort them. I'd be like, yeah, it's fine. You did your best. Also, I sometimes say in these situations, like, look, for me, you don't have to say anything. If you don't feel like it, you can go. If you feel like sharing something, just share whatever you feel like sharing. And most times these skaters say something, especially the seniors, because they know they do have to do it. And because probably they were also told by their federations, please behave. In some cases, I just remember as one example at Europeans 1.5 years ago when Minerva, Fabian Haase and Nikita Volodin had a very devastating free skate and they dropped out of the medal positions, that there were a couple of journalists. I was not the only one there. They hit them with some questions. And it really, like Minerva said, after a few minutes, this talk right now feels like a therapy for me because I'm analyzing myself right now and it makes me feel a lot better. So sometimes we also have this. But you also just mentioned the junior skaters. Pairs at Junior World 1.5 years ago, so in 2024, was for me personally the worst event because we had one pair after the next coming out crying and really having a devastating skate. I broke my heart for these skaters. And what comes on top of this, that I'm also required to take a photo, because if you know Golden Skate, you know the mixed zone post, they have a quote and usually a photo. And often the talking part is fine for the skaters. But of course, if you have cried or it's really you ruined your makeup or they're not comfortable with taking a photo. And there, I think I kind of improved a little bit in my own strategy during the last season, that earlier on, I was then sometimes like, I didn't ask them to pose for a picture, but I took a little photo from the side so that we had still something to post. But I really don't feel that was maybe the right way to handle it. So this season, if a skater really didn't feel comfortable, I just didn't take the photo and uploaded an old photo and always put the paragraph like, look, this is an older photo. It was fine. And I think everyone really appreciates that much more than having the crying skater photographed.
That makes total sense. And I'm sure was extremely appreciated.
Yeah. I mean, there's a thing that we talk about on the show a lot, which is that we always try to think of the athletes as humans first,
Yes.
Not specifically as athletes or entertainers or somebody who owes something to us. They're putting like their entire lives into every one of those performances. And when it doesn't go well, I don't want them to have to deal with like that crushing emotional baggage of performing again once they get off. So I appreciate everything that you're talking about there, because that's in line with how we always want to think of it too, is respecting the boundaries of a person who's having a tough time. How many other journalists are typically in the mix zone with you? Like, I mean, you said they're kind of walking through and just doing a couple of sound bites for everybody. Is there a lot at this point?
So it really, really, really depends. I would probably guess compared to other sports, it's probably minimal. The bigger the events, the more journalists are there. And there's also, it definitely depends on the country the skater is from. The biggest crowd of journalists is definitely the Japanese. The biggest media attention I personally ever experienced was in Saitama Worlds 2023, when the Japanese skaters had skated. The little media room was actually crowded. It was full. There was more than 50 people in that room interviewing the Japanese skaters. They are sending their journalists out all over the world to the Grand Prix, to Worlds. This year's Worlds in Boston, there was surely 20 to 30 Japanese journalists who were interviewing the Japanese skaters. So that's definitely the biggest crowd. But these journalists are mainly interested in the Japanese skaters. Hardly they talk to international skaters, not from Japan. Also, because the level of English in the Japanese speaking world is not the highest. And also a lot of these journalists, they only speak Japanese, so they couldn't even communicate with the other skaters. So the Japanese definitely get the most attention. And for the other skaters to just say a number at Worlds, in the first groups, I'm often the only one who talks with someone. And then the higher the groups are, like in the last group, there are maybe 15 to 20 people interviewing. For example, the Canadian skaters at Worlds. Then there was the US skaters this year at Worlds. Of course, because it was in the US, so there were a couple of more folks from the US there. So there was also kind of big bunch of US journalists there. Probably, I would say like 20 to 30 who were interviewing the US skaters. And of course, if there is this big amount of journalists interviewing a skater they have 5 minutes of time, you really have to really have the elbows if you want to get your question in. And usually I'm not that person. Because I do go to a lot of events, especially also to the challengers and to the smaller events. And there I'm often really the only person speaking with the skaters. So I'd be like, okay, I talked to them already 5 times this year. I let the others go ahead. And then I just take some notes from the other people's questions. Because the mixed zone, the interviews, they are not just for you. So whoever is there from the press can take the answers. Like it's not, how do you say, I'm right now missing the word.
It's not exclusive.
Exclusive, exactly. That was the word I was missing. So these interviews aren't exclusive. Whenever you're around as a journalist, you can record everything that is being said in the mixed zone and you can use it for your publication.
And you mentioned that you do a lot of those smaller events, and so you're actually at these things over and over again. So I'd imagine at this point that you're a more familiar face to a lot of the skaters. Has that lent itself to creating a lot more rapport? They know you, your face, they know you by name. Does it make it easier to get those interviews and more comfortable conversations?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't say I know them all like super well personally, but as you said, they're a familiar face and I'm a familiar face to them. And also, I think almost all of them know that I work for Golden Skate and that I do these posts flattering for them. Like I really try not to put them in a bad light and I'm being positive. So they do definitely feel more comfortable. It's not only me, there's also some others who they're familiar with. So it's definitely good for them to have a familiar face in the mix zone that they can make eye contact with.
I'm sure it makes them feel safe.
Yes. I also had one situation at Junior Worlds 2023, because especially in juniors, these skaters are so unexperienced with interviews and with mixed zone, and especially with the press conference. Sometimes they are there at the very first time in their life attending a press conference because there's hardly media attention. There's also no mixed zone at Junior Grand Prix. I have been to a couple of Junior Grand Prix, but there you really have to like search the skaters yourself you want to talk to. One story from Junior Worlds 2023 with Swiss skater Naoki Rossi, who there won the silver medal, unexpectedly. And he was really kind of afraid of the press conference that so much attention suddenly on him. So he was actually searching the eye contact with me throughout the whole press conference. And I was sitting there, I was like, yes, you're doing well. You're doing well. Go on. It's fine. It's fine. Relax.
I imagine that a lot of times if you have skaters who are often on podiums or are usually in the top 5 or 6, they're going to be very used to that experience, especially if they've been doing it since juniors. But when you get the person who gets a surprise podium placement on the Grand Prix or wins something out of nowhere, I think you do occasionally get that skater who suddenly has that, like, I'm not used to being looked at at all, and they don't know how to handle that moment. We've seen when we watch the podium medal ceremonies, you occasionally have somebody who doesn't know what to do. they come out and they're looking around. They're like, I don't know
Yes.
where to stand. I don't know how to act. So I got to imagine for all of them, there's a big learning curve if you aren't used to that level of success and it happens suddenly.
Yes. Also, because of that, I really think it's good that they do these kind of things also already on the junior level. For example, for a long time, the senior press conferences were streamed. I think some of them still are streamed, but they never do it for the juniors, so that the juniors are not right away exposed to the big public. So these press conferences, I feel like also the mixed zone for the juniors is like a good learning experience. They're getting prepared for the big stage when they're entering the seniors.
So smart.
Considering you're based in Europe, but you're going all over the place, obviously this is one of those unique sports that is truly international. The language barrier, you talked about it with like the Japanese journalists often don't speak any or very little English. And we see a lot of skaters who it seems like English has kind of become the middle ground language, the common language for a lot of people. And we'll see like Japanese or Korean skaters meeting each other. Sometimes they're speaking English to each other because that's the common language that they have. What is that like in your experience? And because, you are not a native English speaker either. So in seeing the skaters communicate with each other or to the press, I'm just curious, like what that experience is like getting over those language barriers.
So what I experienced, I'm doing it more and more with the mixed zones since COVID. I started as a journalist a little bit before that, but I'm doing these mixed zone things very regularly since 2021, 2022. And even since then, I feel like I've noticed an improvement in English skills in the skaters. I really feel like a lot of them, also the juniors, they know already that English is important and they try their best, and it's getting better and better. The communication between me and the journalist and the skaters, most of them at least speak a basic level of English, so we can communicate in the mixed zone. For the Korean skaters, usually the team leader is with them and helps with the translation, so they can answer in Korean and the team leader then translates it for the press into English. This also sometimes is the case with the Japanese skaters. Sometimes, because there's such a big bunch of Japanese journalists, we don't really even get the opportunity to ask anything in English. So I luckily have a translator at home, or I do have someone who helps me with the translation. So I can just send them an audio and they send me a translation of what the Japanese skater said. But you mentioned also rather the communication between the skaters. Of course, there's a private area of the skaters where the journalists also don't have access to, which is, I think, very good.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't hear so much conversation between the skaters. But for example, one story I heard that, for example, Kaori Sakamoto, she doesn't speak English to the press, but apparently within the skaters, she does speak English and she dares so much more. And she's actually very funny, but she didn't get through the hurdle yet to also do it in front of the press because, of course, it's recorded and everything. Yeah, I also think that as the level of English improves within the skating community, also the skaters can communicate better among each other.
I want to step off from that a little bit. The mix zone is where like these things are essentially mandatory or compulsory to a degree. Yeah. But what we've seen a little bit more of lately is skaters who are actively looking for press and are stepping outside of those typical press zones to speak with content creators and interviewers in other spaces. I think of Lila Fear and Lewis Gibson, who have been more active in trying to build a brand for themselves. We haven't been to a ton of skating events, but we have seen skaters out in the general zone, like speaking with people too. Is that something that you're finding? Is that growing? Is that opportunities that you found like to do those types of interviews outside of the typical media areas?
I personally, as I always go as the press, I usually do my interviews in the allocated areas for the press. But I do know that a lot of skaters are very open for these opportunities. As I just said, I kind of started with COVID. So, of course, in these times, these interactions were very limited.
Yeah.
But as luckily this got much better, a lot of skaters, not all of them, are very open to talk to fans, do little fun fan interviews, interactions, and are always happy about attention as long as they are approached in the right moment. But I do feel that most of skating fans actually do know when is the right moment and do know how to behave. So skaters, I feel like, are usually very comfortable around fans.
That's great to hear, because it's a thing that as the creator space grows around this, one of the concerns that we always have is there's this sort of like amateur journalism that happens online. And I mean, and we've been podcasters for 12 years or so now. And so we've, previous to this, when we were in more of the pop culture space, we did tons and tons of interviews, oftentimes at events. And you could see some people who handle it very well and some who do it poorly. And our concern with this world is that, again, there's not always media training available for the skaters. And especially with junior skaters and younger ones, you got to be really careful in those environments, how those things are approached. So I'm glad to hear that it seems like it's mostly positive, because, you know, this can be a space that drama sells. And that's, you know, not our thing. We prefer to stay away from the drama, but
Yes.
we know that it is something out in that world. And do you ever feel a press for that as a creator in this space, that whether it's fans or publications or whatever? And it always sounds like Pirouette and Golden Skate are totally on the level, but is there pressure to try to get something that's more salacious or more reactionary out of the skaters?
There are. There's so many thoughts I had through what you just said. So first of all, I also started as an amateur, totally. Mm-hmm. And I started with doing fan interviews. My first interview was for the fan club of Dennis Vasilyev's. And this is how I got into it. And because I feel like I probably did have most times, hopefully, the right approach to approach the skaters in the right time and have kind of an empathy when to talk to them, I got to the point where I am right now. Second of all, there is definitely jealousy in the creator community and also from the fans that I experienced myself as well. I don't want to go too much into detail on that, but I feel it could be worse. But there have been some negative reactions towards me where I'd be like, okay, that's probably because of jealousy. And then you talked about the inappropriate questions or requests towards skaters. I have experienced that rather from professional media outlets than from fans, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, there are these outlets who just send a journalist to, for example, Europeans and Worlds. And these journalists are not specifically skating journalists. They cover a lot of sports. And I often find them really asking, because you can tell that these people are not really into skating. They are sports journalists and they are after a story and they want to also put things in a negative perspective. So they really ask questions like, was it even worth coming here for you after this performance? Oh, you must be very disappointed. Or, for example, there was a German pair, Jennifer Jense von Rensburg and Benjamin Stefan, this year at Europeans, who did fantastic programs in the short and in the free. But it was unfortunately not enough for the 10th place, and they just missed out of it. They got 11th in the end because the level was just so high. But I think they had a personal best in both of their performances. Yeah. And then there was a bunch of German journalists like, but you missed it. They kept focusing on that they missed that 10th place. And to the point where Benjamin said, like, yeah, we did what we could do. Like, what else can we say? This is terrible. One example, but with the German press, of course, I understand it because I'm a German speaker. But it's not only the German press at the big events, but I think these are the people who are not specifically into skating and they don't really know too much about the sport, who I feel like have sometimes uncomfortable questions and something that I would feel inappropriate to ask a skater after a skate. I personally don't know too much about fans being inappropriate. But I do think that there's a lot of things going on online that definitely hate messages, especially on social media. They're hitting the skaters. I know from some skaters that they are getting these messages. So it's definitely a thing. And we also know that Olivia Smart spoke out about this at the beginning of last season, which I think was very good and very brave. So I think from the fan perspectives, I think maybe these things are rather online. Yeah.
I think the social media space is always kind of a minefield. I saw Tara Prasad talk about some of the challenges that she's had with getting some really negative messages, and she just seems like a delightful person. And it's so sad that people choose to attack her because she is a woman of color in this space and that she represents a country that almost never gets represented in skating. And all of that stuff is so frustrating. And unfortunately, it's become par for course in anything in the current environment. It's not exclusive to skating, but we really wish that we wouldn't see those kinds of things. On a different note, thinking about the in-arena experience, I feel like people would probably think that for you going to these events that you get to see all the skating, watch all the events because you're at all of them and it's your job. But it sounds like being in the mix zone is going to be so dominant that you're going to not see a lot of the performances. So how much of it do you actually get to experience in real time?
I am so happy that actually you bring this up, because this is what most people don't realize, that I actually hardly see anything of the actual skating, especially at the big events. This is also one reason why I really, really enjoy going to smaller competitions. I like the Junior Grand Prix, Challenger events, especially Challenger events. Also like this little small competitions, for example, Challenge Cup in the Netherlands. I always really enjoy going there because at these events, I'm also more free. I can decide myself who I interview. And usually I see most of the competition and especially the exciting parts of it. Whereas at the big events, especially at Grand Prix Final, I have to say Grand Prix Final, I sometimes don't see a single performance live because I have to interview everyone. Then usually there's a press conference during the ice resurfacing, so you can't even see the first skater of the next discipline. So yeah, I'm seeing most of the competition on the TV screen in the mix zone because there's always a TV screen in the mix zone. So I do have to follow on what's happening while I'm probably interviewing the skater who just skated before that. Sometimes we have to do these interviews from a protocol because we also have the computer with a live protocol. So because we're in an interview with a skater, you really had no clue how the skater after that performed. So you have to go through the protocol quickly to see what happened, and then you do your interview based on that.
Oh my gosh.
There's a few skaters that are always, it's important for me that I see them live because I'm rooting for them, or I know it's like a very special performance for them. I'm sometimes able to make that possible because I have lovely colleagues who maybe help me taking a photo and collecting some quotes. Or sometimes I can even ask some skaters to wait if I know that they're chill personalities. For example, Lucas Britschke or someone like that, they're really fine. Yeah, they just come back in 5 minutes. And that is really, really, really rare. So at the big events, I hardly see any skating live, especially of the later groups. But that's part of the job.
That must make the conversations challenging to ask the right questions. And we've had times in the past where we've had to interview actors and filmmakers and authors about things that we haven't seen or read yet. And it's tough to go in and be like, I want to ask you real questions, but I don't know enough about this. So an instance like that of being like, I didn't even see you skate, I just saw a score come up, to contextualize that has to be challenging. So I imagine that would be kind of awkward sometimes.
Yes.
As you said, it is not always easy to interview someone just based from a protocol or seeing it on TV. Except for one case, a fun little story I'll tell in a moment. I always, though, knew at least how the skater did. Like, usually I at least have seen the protocol, or I knew, okay, they had one fall, everything else was okay. So usually always I know that. There was just one incident with Amber Glenn. Amber, probably she's never going to hear that, but if so, there's a little secret I have to tell you. The Lombardia Trophy, I think it was 2022, 2021. Like, it was at the beginning when I did the mixed zone that extensively. And the Lombardia Trophy is a challenger. Not everybody goes through the mixed zone. So the organizers there want that you give them a list of the skaters you wish to interview in advance so they can take care that these skaters go through the mixed zone. And I was there with one wonderful French colleague of mine, and we had given them the list. And I think we just forgot that Amber Glenn was skating in that group already. It was a short program where the starting orders are mixed up. So she had skated while we were interviewing another skater, and we weren't aware that she was coming after that. So the organizers searched for us and like, look, Amber Glenn is waiting for you. And we looked at each other and was like, oh my God, we had literally no clue how she had been skated. No clue at all. But of course, she was waiting for us. So we went in there and like, yeah, Amber, so how are you doing? How was your skate? How do you feel about it? And I do think, I hope so, she didn't notice that we had no clue how she did. But yeah, that was kind of embarrassing story. Luckily, the only time really that happened. But yeah, it takes a lot of experience to do the interview and a protocol. And of course, I would wish to have seen the performance in detail and the crowd's reactions to do better interviews, but it's just not possible in my case with the mixed zone. But of course, I do also do interviews, like long in-depth interviews for Pirouette Magazine and also for Golden Skate. And for that, of course, I'm better prepared. I do rewatch the performances, but in the mixed zone, it's just not possible often.
That actually makes me think of an instance I know of where that was different for you was Road to 2026 that you got to go to at the new Olympic venue in Milan.
Yes.
I loved watching you on social media sharing what was kind of the only visibility into that competition because it was in this a new Olympic venue and wasn't being broadcast anywhere. So what was that like?
Yeah, that was a very different experience, but also very fun experience. Maybe I need to start with that usually I'm going to these events as writing press. That means I am not allowed to film. Usually there is journalists who have TV rights who are allowed to film, but me for Golden Skate, I'm a writing press. So this is also why you usually don't see any kind of video footage on most of the official journalists who are going there because we're just not allowed. And this is very strict. I know one example of a journalist who got their accreditation taken away at a Grand Prix event because they were filming for their personal Instagram. So it's really just not allowed, and it's quite strict. At the Road of Milan, very surprisingly though, they didn't sell the TV rights. So as soon as the TV rights are not sold, basically everybody is allowed to film. And as I saw that a lot of fans were, of course, eager to watch this event, and it was just not broadcasted. So I checked in with the organizers to really make super sure that I was on the legal side. And then I did a live stream on the Golden Skate Instagram and streamed the event. And I was also only allowed to film from one specific spot. So this is why I was standing pretty high up. I would have loved to the board, but they showed me like, this is where you should be filming from. So yeah, I was live streaming that event. Also did a little bit of comments, and I noticed actually how hard it is to commentate. Of course, I was holding my phone, and so I was still having to do the filming job and the commentating job at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
So it was really difficult because usually I'm really confident in, of course, saying which jump is which and separating them. But if you film, and then sometimes it slipped, like, okay, was that a flip, was this a latch? And I felt like so embarrassed, like I was like, okay, I have to talk around that audience didn't notice that I didn't recognize the jump. So that made it a little bit challenging, but it was a fun experience. And I hope, and I know that a lot of people appreciated that I did it. So yeah, that was something completely different. And also, I was very happy to be at this Road to Milan event, to see the Olympic venue, to like smell the Olympic air already a little bit, where it all will be happening next year.
What was your impression of that venue?
It was very big. Well, it was big and empty, to be honest, but this kind of makes sense because this was not a big advertised competition. So for the small competition, it seemed very big and very empty, but it was definitely not a bigger arena, for example, than where they had Worlds, probably even a bit smaller. It all seemed very professional. And they also already had the LEDs and all the animations were already like, this was the Olympic event.
Oh, fun. So they were really testing everything.
Exactly. This is why they did it. They tested everything. The press area will probably be at the same place where it was there. I guess it was similar to another big event, for example, Worlds, from the organizing perspective, but also because they had already these Olympic animations and stuff like that. So it felt really cool, and you could feel the vibe already a little bit.
So a thing that I'm curious about, because you go to like so many of the competitions and you go to them all over the place internationally, at home, when we're watching the ones that are actually broadcast that we get to see, something that we have picked out a lot is there are familiar faces in the crowds. So there are fans that we see in numerous places and oftentimes all over the world. And it's become kind of a Where's Waldo game. If that reference makes sense to you.
Yes.
We're looking at like, okay, where are the two gals in the pink sweaters? And
Yes.
they sat a row ahead of us at Skate America. And we're like, oh, they were right there, but we didn't ever talk to them. And there's like a couple in like their 60s. I think they're always wearing like big yellow and blue jackets that look like it's an American sports team or something. So I'm curious, for you going to these things all the time, are you picking out those familiar faces? Do the skaters recognize those people? As the culture of the sport, how much does it become oh, I see you all over the place all the time?
I think it really depends on the skaters. Some are very, very aware of this. For example, Nikolai Memola comes to my mind, who says even if he's not in an event, he watches every single event. So he's someone who's really into that. And it really depends on the skaters, I think, how much they are really into these things. But I think a lot of them notice these fans and really appreciate seeing them. And the skaters, I mean, they're normal people like you and I, and they're also happy to see a familiar face, if it's in the mix zone or if it's in the crowd. And as I said, most of these people are very well behaved. They would never disturb the privacy of the skaters. So those skaters who do pay attention to these details, they're usually happy and very appreciative of these super fans.
I love that.
Do you have any particular, I don't want to say playing favorites here, but are there any skaters that stand out as some of like the best in the mix zone? They're the most fun to talk to, that really make your job enjoyable?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, of course, I think everybody has their favorites, skating-wise, personality-wise, and from the mix zone. For example, there are personalities who stand out in every situation. For me, of course, the easiest, the ones that really love to talk. As I just mentioned, Nikolai Memola, for example, he's a favorite for sure because he's just so funny and he really comes there, wants to talk, and he's someone who really doesn't hold back. He just tells whatever is on his mind, for example. Really, really fun guy. I really like Alyssa Liu's personality, kind of the same reasons, because she just really speaks her mind and she doesn't hide behind some things that she thinks she's obliged to say. I won't say any names, but in particular with the American skaters, sometimes you do have the impression that they do say what they think they have to say, and they're kind of wearing a little bit of a mask. Mm-hmm. So there's a few skaters who I say, okay, I can type the post already before they started.
Well, and we know there's a few that have gotten themselves into trouble a few times before they got a little media training because they put their foot in their mouth or spoke off the cuff and caught some flack for it.
It's understandable. Of course, Denis Vasilyev is always, he's a philosopher, and if you saw his reactions in the leader's chair at Worlds, he's just a fun guy, and he really is very intelligent, so he always has something different to say in the mixed zone, so always something very deep. Probably you can already see, for example, Jukka Orihara and Juho Pirinen of Finland. Always very delightful, but you can feel that vibe already.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, we always talk about them as they have the big theater kid energy, and they just seem delightful. So I imagine that in the interview that would come off that way.
That definitely is the case. Also, Koshiro Shimada just comes to my mind because he's always so positive. Like he and Lucas Britschke kind of the same way. Even if they have like a really bad skate, they can turn it into a positive for themselves right away. 1.5 seasons ago, Koshiro really had bad outings on the Grand Prix. But he said, like, I still enjoyed it. And I really, in every moment, I feel like I love figure skating.
Aww.
So endearing. I wish that all skaters could think like that and feel like that, because this is such a hard sport and mentally so tough. So it's great to hear these people who are, I think, mentally in the right place.
It's so lovely. And I mean, everything you just said about Koshiro it just radiates off of him, the joy of figure skating. I wish everybody could feel it. I do want to ask one last question, which is just, what is the thing you're most looking forward to this coming season? I mean, the Olympics is kind of the easy one, but just like in general, what are you looking forward to?
Well, of course, the Olympics is the first thing that comes to my mind. Also, I'm quite excited because we have a lot of junior skaters rising up to seniors, which we didn't have the last couple of years because of the age limit race. So the last 2 seasons, we didn't have these people moving up. So this year we do have a few. Of course, Jiexin is the first one who comes to mind. In Paris, we have Olivia Flores, Luke Wang from the US who are moving up. In the men, whom do you have? I mean, Adam Hagara has been and all over the place all the time. But who's someone? But
Jacob Sanchez, I think, is moving to seniors.
Jacob Sanchez has been age eligible before, but he will be focusing also on seniors. But yeah, we do have a couple of skaters who are now for the first time appearing in seniors, which we used to have every season, but now we didn't have it for 2 seasons. So this will definitely be interesting. And yeah, of course, the Olympic qualifier. I'm already scared now. Like, not that I am particularly looking forward to it, but it's so exciting. And it will be heartbreaking, I know already, because Olympic dreams will be shattered, but others will come true. So that's definitely something very exciting.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm emotionally prepared for that Olympic qualifier yet. That's so scary.
Same. I felt the same at Worlds, actually, especially there in the men's and the women's event where so many had to drop out that we're hoping. Yeah, unfortunately, I think I will not be able to go to the Olympic qualifier event because it's too far away. China is very difficult to travel to. And I do carry my travel expenses myself. I do get paid for the work that I do. But unfortunately, I guess the qualifier is not within my budget. But I'll be following from home. I will be able to watch the competition.
That's what I was just going to say. You get to watch it with all of us and like hold your breath like we're all going to be.
Yeah. And for one that for us is on the other side of the world. So it's one of those things that we're either up in the middle of the night watching it or just waking up the next morning to find out, which sometimes for my own anxiety, it's something of a relief to just sleep through a competition and then wake up and just check Jackie Wong or check the ISU app or something and just find out what happened. And I can handle it after the fact. It's much less stressful for me to do that, but that one is definitely going to be a nail biter.
I'm surprised that you say that, but because for me it's very different. I cannot just pull up the results. I really can't. Even if I can't watch it live, I at least will go through the recording and go skater by skater. Because that's just so brutal to pull out the results. And here it is.
For me, like, I hate spoilers when it comes to like TV shows and movies. But when it comes to like sporting events, there's something about if we couldn't watch it in real time, if I find out the results and then I watch it, it just takes that extra burden of tension off of me that I'm not like pretending like I'm experiencing it in real time.
Also, I want to point out that you get so anxious when you're watching.
Yes, I do. I'm excitable. So, I mean, watching Worlds live in real time, I mean, I was jumping up and down in our living room and yelling and losing my voice and doing whatever because I was so excited. But like when people have bad skates, when there's falls, when something dangerous happens, I'm an anxious wreck during it. So sometimes watching it after the fact is a little easier on me.
Also, I do want to, I know you, the US Nationals will be in St. Louis for you.
Yes. Yeah. Right here in the hometown. Yeah.
Because you are great interviewers, so maybe you can apply for the credentials, or even if you don't get approved for these, go ahead and do some interviews with the skaters. I'm very sure they will appreciate it. We touched this before, like most skaters love the attention because we are a small sport and they are not getting much attention. So feel free to, not only you, also other creators, they should be feeling free to reach out to them via Instagram. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't get a reply.
Right, yeah.
That is true.
We have some plans that we're working on for the St. Louis Nationals, like you said, because it is basically in our backyard. Both for trying to do more of that type of interviews and opportunities, but also just to kind of try to help people who are coming into town to know what's going to be going on and maybe even try to make some social events to gather fans and people together. Because I mean, when we did Skate America in Allen, Texas, I mean, we were sort of rolling into a big suburb with, there's a lot of stores there, but there's not a lot to see necessarily because it is just a suburb.
Yes.
You know, it was a little bummer because like, sometimes we see people, they're traveling like, oh, we're in Tallinn or we're in Tokyo or whatever. And so there's culture everywhere and there's all these things to see. And we're like, okay, now we're in Allen, Texas. There's a really big Target here. And that's pretty cool. You can go shopping in a few places. We enjoyed our time there, but it wasn't exactly a tourist destination.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's definitely not.
St. Louis is maybe not the most visually exciting city all over the place, but there's some pretty cool stuff here. And so we want to be able to find ways to help people who are going to be coming in from out of town, find the ways to best enjoy the city while they're here for the event as well. So we will definitely be working on those things. So, okay, as we wrap up here, Judith, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad we finally were able to make it happen, because we did meet you at Skate America, like really briefly. You were so busy at that one. We got to just sit in the stands and enjoy things, but you were in the mix zone like usual. So it was like, a couple of minutes to catch you like right after something was done as we were running off to hotels. So I'm glad that we were able to finally sit down for this interview. And then, like we said, Pirouette Magazine and Golden Skate are the two outfits that you work with. Do you do any additional stuff from like your own channels at all?
I do have my own YouTube channel where I used to do some video interviews. It has been a bit quiet lately. I mean, I do have my own Instagram where I sometimes publish things. But right now, to be honest, my life also got quite busy outside of skating, also within skating, where I can't talk about everything too much. So right now, it's really rather the focus on these two outlets. But sometimes I do publish something else on my personal pages, but not regularly right now.
Well, again, thank you, Judith, for joining us for this. Thank you for joining us on Scoreography to talk about all this. We're so hyped for this next season. I'm sure that you are both hyped, and I got to imagine pre-exhausted before you're going to be constantly traveling and doing all this stuff, but all for awesome things. So that is great. So I'm not entirely certain what our next episode is going to be. So I think we will just wrap it up there. And for Scoreography, I'm Adrian Buskey.
And I'm Wendy Buskey.
And we will talk to you next time.
Bye.